the bill of entries for the same are filed as services and claimed exemption thereof. Now, the law does not say that you don't have to file bill of entry. You can file a bill of entry and claim an exemption under certain customs provisions. Thereby, you are proving that you are also importing goods and you are also importing services. In one of the client case, what has happened is they never filed bill of entries, and now customs authorities are saying that the reason why they did not file the bill of entries and they created this contract is because they always knew that this amount is not towards services but it is towards goods, and this is a separate way of taking away money from India without payment of customs duties. So I am just giving you an importance of going through the minute documentation to avoid this type of litigation. So with this I finish my part. It's over to you, Karan.
So before you take this into, I just wanted one more as an offshoot to his this thing. You take cognizance of what I'm saying, and Nishal also can react. He said one single contract or split. The way Hitesh says the splitting would be better because it has got goods, services, it's on club. You don't have a case where goods and services, VAT also, service tax also, so we are trying to split. And then the only worry is whether this will treat as one single contract because of the umbrella. And for that he said that 5% supervision charges. Now in this, whether the initial negotiation itself, like you see toll contracts. In toll contracts, it is the main holding company enters into for tendering throughout. But the condition is very clear that ultimately be executed by an SPV. And then it is the only SPV which will be recognized by the authorities. And if there are two toll roads, there will be two separate SPVs. Because the bank financing also is like that. And then ultimately the taxes are also qua the SPVs. So where the same concept can be juxtaposed to this situation that the tendering stage or at the negotiation stage, where Vishal's concern is at the time of negotiation only one person. Thereafter you are introducing so many people. Whereas at that time only the condition in the MOU is, which in the toll contract, that it will be through separate SPVs in order to reduce responsibility for construction, for this, and hence there will be 3 SPVs. Because taking from where, the top fellow is only supervision, nothing else. Whether this can help to advance the argument to split up, then you can see.
Sure. So, yes, I think that can work. As I mentioned, that we always look at the starting point as the notice inviting tender. However, having had a tender which may be for a composite or an indivisible contract, it's always open for the parties to then split them and say we'll enter into divisible contracts. But this has to be appropriately documented. So if you are going to have a situation where Smart International is going to now negotiate such a contract where they say that while I'm negotiating, I'm coming to the terms, however, I'm doing this for and on behalf of my various subsidiaries which may be independently providing services to you. This should form part of your minutes of the meetings, your discussions. It should ideally be also provided for in your contract as part of your preamble that while the NIT was for an indivisible contract, we have subsequently agreed to split this into independent transactions which are not dependent on one another and things like that. And then you can go on to have your agreements drafted in that fashion. And then you'll be clearly saying that yes, the intention is to have independent transactions and should be viewed independently. So I think that is quite possible to do so, even when you have the parent entity negotiating for various subsidiaries across the world. On just a few other points which were mentioned, and one was also, Mr. Hede also mentioned that the various factors you determine or you consider in order to determine whether this is a composite contract or a divisible contract. And many times we find, or at least what I have found, is that small issues really have the risk or the potential of derailing your whole interpretation. For example, many times people go and say, I have got a split contract for supply and services. Services are pure services, nothing else. And then they say, in services I am doing, say, foundation work. Then it is very difficult. And they go to the extent of saying, well, in supply contracts, I have supplied everything from cement, steel, gravel, sand, and everything, nuts, bolts. Then the question is that you are going into an area where people are not going to believe that in a construction or a foundation job, you are separately supplying cement, gravel, sand, and you are separate nuts and bolts and screws, and there's a labor contract. So when you're structuring these contracts, you have to be very careful don't put all these minor materials as part of a supply contract. It should form part of your erection commissioning contract to say this is actually the responsibility of the erection contractor or the construction contractor and not part of the supply contract. It could be very minor materials like welding electrodes, like as I mentioned, nuts and bolts and all those things, which can have the potential of revealing your transaction. The other aspect was relating to AOP or consortium. Yes, that will have to be looked at, that whether, considering the way the whole transaction is structured, the whole negotiations, the contracts, whether this forms an AOP or a consortium. And if it does form an AOP or a consortium, then effectively Bharat Power Company is providing or engaging into a contract with the AOP, and then therefore the AOP then in turn may be sourcing all these goods and services from the various subsidiaries. And therefore all these five entities are providing or supplying the goods and services to the AOP, and the AOP is then executing an entire and indivisible works contracts for Bharat Power Company. Then of course, depending on which part of the world the AOP gets structured, if it's the AOP is outside India, then the whole transaction will be taxable in the hands of Bharat Power Company under the reverse charge mechanism for the purposes of service tax, because unless that AOP is registered for tax purposes in India. Vishal also raised an issue relating to the FOB or the CIF valuation for the price for offshore supplies. Now, typically this really does not impact indirect taxes, because for customs purposes anyway, the value up to the port of importation is added, or the cost up to the port of importation is added for the purpose of customs valuation.
Okay, sorry. I think the question was more in the context of that if the terms are different, would the VAT authorities make an argument that the property is passed on the shores of India and hence let's levy a VAT?
Yeah. So from the angle of the VAT law, the VAT law says a sale in the course of import is exempt from payment of VAT. And when this is defined, the interpretation is that the property in the goods may pass before the import movement or after the import movement, so long as the import is integrally connected with the transaction, it's a transaction not liable for tax. So for the purpose of VAT, the place where the property passes is of no consequence. It also may be a situation where I can have a situation or a contract which says the passing of the property is at the point I load the equipment on the vessel. However, my price is CIF. That means the property will be different from my price, to say that I will load it, you become the owner, but my responsibility is to arrange for the insurance as well as the freight up to the destination port. So again, you may have a situation where the point of passing of property is distinct from your price. That's all from me.
You can respond, both of you. I can only see one thing. Vision is very low. Sight is okay, but not the vision. But what I can see is, from your perspective, you have a case. If you have one single contract, it is worthwhile. If those two construction PEs are not treated as PEs, you have one case. The way they are copying, I think they would like to split it. That would be better. That's what I can see from this.
So yeah, I have only a couple, maybe not relevant one. Of course, the point that Hitesh, I think, raised is an interesting aspect of this.
Sorry to interrupt you. My only request from both of you is just about 2-3 minutes.
Yeah,
So I have at least one question.
Absolutely. The umbrella agreement and the fact that we often don't disclose to the tax authorities. Now, tax authorities are very smart and they may ask for a copy of it. So I was just wondering, how would it be treated for income tax purposes? If they say that, okay, then transfer pricing authorities may want to attribute some portion, as you said very correctly, to the overall supervisory role played by the foreign contractor in relation to the umbrella agreement. And then I would say that, okay, again under 917 it will be looking for technical services, but because this is a US company or a Singapore company, you're not really making available any knowledge, and on that basis I could still argue that that is not taxable in India, and therefore even for transfer pricing purposes it's not really very relevant. So even if there is a certain component, maybe there's an argument to make saying that that portion therefore should not be taxable in India. The other point I just wanted to refer to was when Parin talked about the FEMA aspects, and he said Vishal and Hegde will either cover it. I think you're right that under the FEMA law you cannot make a payment on behalf of a non-resident. But I've hardly come across in so many years of practice anyone really looking at it in great detail. So you make a payment to an Indian company on behalf of a non-resident, and if that can clearly be proved, then yes, there could be a FEMA violation. But if you have a contract in place and an invoice in place, and the invoice says X is the amount of consideration that is flowing to the Indian subsidiary, then at least on the form of it, that is the amount that is contracted to be paid for. And therefore, probably this FEMA angle really doesn't come up very often. So that was my point.
So I think on the divisible contract, what can possibly be done is we can enter into 4 different contracts, but with the same entity. So the idea was that can you consolidate the value at the same entity, and after that you have a subcontract on a cost plus basis, so as to strip value in favor of the overseas company. So that hopefully might vary both the object from a direct and indirect tax perspective. Of course, as I mentioned, it's a very uncertain domain whether a subcontractor constitutes or does not constitute a construction piece per se. And when we look at the commentary, not enough commentaries are available even internationally per se. In Europe, I remember when we were discussing with some German counsel, we were of absolute clear view that a subcontractor cannot be my permanent establishment because I have nothing to do with it. I have no control over that subcontractor, but of course it will kind of depend on country to country. The second point on that sale, while you did mention that if I am importing in the course of the sale, that we are envisaging that of course if my Indian subsidiary is taking first goods in his name and then selling it back to back. But if it really is a direct sale is happening, which is normally the case in an offshore sale, because unnecessarily I would not like to attribute any value to my Indian subsidiary if he really has no role to play. In that case, of course, the challenge I presume would remain is where the property passes and whether VAT in that case becomes important. From a direct tax perspective, we have one Supreme Court decision in the case of Mahavir Commercial, which says that finally you have to refer to the Sale of Goods Act. Sale of Goods Act really says the intention of the party to transfer. And what you mentioned looks very interesting, that even if I do it on a CIF basis, I rather have my contract to say that this is more of a facility I am giving. But for all purposes, the ownership would be deemed to have been transferred before the goods enter the shore. Hopefully that can really surface that. On the FEMA part, if at all, anybody is acting as a collection agent on behalf of whatever it is, I do know for sure that that creates a capital account transaction because it fits into the definition of my asset or liability really changing outside India. In the new law, expressly there are few circulars, for example, circular issued in 2003, 56 I believe number, where few foreign channel companies, who had collection agents in India, they were collecting money and they always used to require RBI approval. After that it was made under the automatic route. So I believe on a technical perspective, if really the monies are not really paid to the respective companies, but are paid in a consolidated manner to a single legal entity, it would fall under, or it should fall under some kind of a prior RBI approval process. So I think that needs to be taken care of, or you need to go into company.
But I think in this case, probably as far as the offshore supply is concerned, that will be paid directly.
Yes.
And it's only the Indian portion which is likely to be paid to the Indian parties.
Yes.
So the point on the remittance and the advertiser and the retaining the 15% or whatever you're talking of,
Yes.
is in relation to a person when you want to pay for a foreign broadcaster or whatever.
Absolutely. So in a case where we have a single, let's say, entity getting the contract which are then subcontracted, if you are paying directly to a non-resident, I think then the only issue, as Mr. Hegde mentioned, is Section 3 of FEMA, which is one of the items which they prohibit unless there is an express approval in either the rules or regulations, is payment on behalf of a non-resident. And of course, in practice, nobody goes into detail.
Sir, in all this, there will also be this company, Indian company, will also be entering into each of these agreements. In spite of an umbrella agreement,
Yes.
there will also be another agreement with each of them.
Yeah.
In spite of that, the rupee element which we are paying here,
Yes.
pursuant to an existing Indian agreement,
Yes.
do you say it will attract FEMA implications?
Yes, because the law is very clear. Nobody can make a payment on, no Indian resident under FEMA can make a payment on behalf of a non-resident.
Yeah, but he's not making payment on behalf. He's pursuant to his own domestic agreement.
No, this would happen if the Indian customer has entered into a contract only with the foreign person, which is US.
No,
So then
here
the
we are
BT,
saying,
yes.
here we are saying there are
Yeah.
one, it's only an umbrella.
Yeah,
that's all.
yeah.
For
That
performance.
should not be a
For better performance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else? Thank you very much. Quickly, we'll have two questions and then we'll have a break. Yeah, sorry.
So this is a question regarding large-scale turnkey contracts, and typically when you look at large-scale turnkey contracts, they are bid in the form of a consortium, because generally speaking, no one single entity has the entire expertise. Either you may not have the financial muscle, either you may not have the supply capacity, or you may not have the technical competence. I mean, this kind of thing, when you bid as a consortium at the outset, this is where the emerging trend has been, that the AR and the courts have been saying that this is an AOP which has bid for the contract. That's where the issue of valuation comes in, and your attribution of profit to the entity per se comes in. The recent circular in service tax, it talks about services being rendered by one JV partner to another JV partner vis-a-vis the services which are being received from outside India. If you could throw some light from direct tax as well as from indirect tax perspective, it would be great.
First, let me understand the question from everybody else, and also from my perspective. What you are saying is there is an Indian company, say in the same example of power plant, who does not give the contract to one person, but gives to a consortium. That's what you want to say?
No, it's the consortium which bids for it. It is not a question of who bids, it is the consortium which bids for it.
Let me frame the question. There are 5 people. All these 5 people come together to bid for this EPC contract. As an association of person is what Samir's question is.
And all 5 are abroad?
No, all 5 are in India. So that's not material for the time being. Whether they are abroad or India is not material.
Yeah.
He is talking about a recent circular which has come in.
No, it is just to interrupt. Unless it is abroad, the cross-border implication is not there. We are today on this discussion on cross-border.
You will have a partner bringing in a lot of supplies from outside India. The whole point is that when you are bidding for the consortium, you need to have a certain technical competence, you need to have certain financial strength.
Yeah.
Okay, those are the terms of the contract. And when you bid together, 3 people come together. One of them will
Indian people, no? 3 Indian entities.
There will be one foreign partner, there might be one Indian partner.
So let's take that example. One foreign person, another 2 Indian person. These 3 consortium bid for a project. They are awarded a contract.
Yeah.
Now take it from there.
So let's assume in our pricing there are these 5 structures are there. All 5 people are separate. So 2 foreigners, 3 Indians. In our example, you are saying that this is an association of a person. This is not a single contract. See, if the word, I mean the term association of person is like it's a very widely interpreted. The general discussion or the general consensus is that it still continues to be a separate individual contracts if you are able to structure it properly. And especially now what is important is you have to structure this more correctly after this particular circular, because what this say earlier what used to happen is, or what is happening is, when the association of persons are coming together, all of these people are treated as individual contractors for the purpose of provision of supply of goods and services. That is the position which is being taken. So we are treating this as individual separate standalone contract. So if some person is providing offshore goods, he is a pure exporter of goods from outside India to a power company in India, and it is an independent transaction. It may be possible that some person may be collecting money from this power company and remitting that money to that foreigner, but for all practical purposes, they are considered as a separate standalone people, even if they have come together. What is important now from an indirect tax perspective is this circular which says that it may be possible that one person, Krishnan sir, is providing a services to another person. So you have A, B, C, D, E, 5 people. So each one is providing services either to each other or to association of person, and then association of person is providing a service to a power company. So here itself it has become a dual transaction. Now whether that circular is right, I mean only the time will tell. According to me, that circular is not correct in terms of giving a clarification. But assuming that it is correct, what you still need to make sure that if it is an association of person, then the contractual obligations and responsibility for each individual has to be defined separately, and that is how it has to be treated. Yes? I have finished. Or I am pausing here. I mean, if Varun wants to add something, yeah, before we get on to a direct.
1 second. Under most of the tax laws, the person includes their AOP. Therefore, all the tax laws require an AOP to be registered for taxation purposes distinct from the members.
There's only one thing. Just from the income tax perspective, I'll try to finish quickly because they had told me to break, but we get a good, since we got a reaction from them, we should get a reaction from you also to balance out. I only want to say the way I understand, if this is an AOP, it's entered into agreement, the AOP will be taxed separately, correct?
Yes.
Am I right? Now under the income tax law, AOP has to pay tax. Does it pay the tax or the profits are computed and the beneficiaries, the relevant persons pays tax? Or it pays tax at both levels? Is it, that the AOP pays tax, matter is over, the other person doesn't pay at all? Or is it the AOP only computes the profit and the beneficiaries pay tax? What is the situation?
I think as far as the income tax is concerned, the AOP is treated as a separate person.
Okay. So he pays tax?
It pays the tax and then the share of profit of the member of the AOP, depending on, except for very few cases, you have below taxable level.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the member of the AOP does not pay the tax.
Section 67, no? Yeah.
67, 86, all that.
86 or all that. So you don't pay. Well, the problem here is, so that you understand the dimension, what he is trying to say.
So, I would believe that for direct tax purposes, I don't think this concept really applies. I don't think there has ever been allegation that members of the AOP are providing service to each other. Either there is an AOP or there is no AOP, because they are providing services to the ultimate Indian party or whoever is the other party involved.
Sure.
There may be A and B, they may come in jointly together. If the tax department alleges that there is joint purpose, common action, whatever it is, then it's an AOP, they are taxing.
That's because Nandu.
Or they are providing services directly to the party concerned.
So that is because income taxes accept the concept of mutuality. One can't give service to oneself. And that is a time tested years together. Unfortunate part in service tax is that courts, some of the high courts have accepted that mutuality will apply in, what should I say, in service tax too. And then one can't give service to oneself. The service is either from the AOP to the client or by the individual person to a client. But there cannot be AOP gives service to a client and a member gives service to AOP. So two stages of taxes. That is still not getting registered by the department here. Courts have accepted. In fact, they are trying to pierce it by giving a deeming fiction. Even after that, the courts have accepted. Jharkhand and Gujarat, etc. In fact, I remember in West Bengal, VAT tribunal also, in the case of the restaurant, in spite of a deeming fiction, they have still said, that one cannot say that it is safe. But it is still, the circular which is quoting is because the department still says that even if the AOP, the member, whatever member gets from the AOP, even that they want to tax. Am I right? That is exactly what, which I think only law can evolve. Service tax otherwise also is a revolving and evolving law.
The developing trend is that under direct tax also they are trying to attribute profit and fix a PE and tax it out over here on this same principle.
But I don't think there will be two stages. No, one is 67 and 80 sections will help. No?
Yeah, so I think with the only caveat, let's presume it's an AOP, right? And if it's an AOP, then the part which is outside India, either it's a branch or a head office, and part which is in India, vice versa. And the only question is, you have this Mumbai Tribunal decision on Desner, where there is a detailed commentary to say that now under the new regime, really these are to be treated as two separate, persons. There is a section 92F which says it includes. The only question therefore remains from a transfer pricing perspective is that therefore the intermittent transactions which are happening, do you really need to disclose it, benchmark it, and we can go on and on. I don't think we will touch more upon it, but so a corporate tax guy would like to say that you cannot earn from self. A transfer pricing guy would like to say no, there is no self. There are dual personality.
Wait, but to unsettle the income tax law also in the DTC there was a provision which tried to overcome mutuality principle as well. But it was good that the DTC has not come into force. So those well-established principles of
I
mutuality.
remember the West Bengal, in spite of a constitutional amendment to tax from the association, there is a West Bengal.
Can I just add?
Yeah, please.
The concept of mutuality was addressed when we introduced 366/29A, the new sales clause. Now, look at that clause 5 which was introduced, or E. It says supply of goods by an unincorporated association of body of persons to a member. Supply of goods by an unincorporated association or body of persons to a member. It says supply by this unincorporated to the members, not the other way around, which is one. So, which is an important aspect of the exam. And this also talks about unincorporated. That means incorporated association anyway is out of the picture. But anyway, in this example, if it's forms in AOP, is going to be unincorporated only.
Judgment I know that West Bengal, in spite of this constitutional amendment, they still say you can't deem something which basically it cannot. Yeah. We just break for how many minutes? 15 minutes. You have got to serve snack. Very difficult. Okay. Anyway, as quick as possible, max 20 minutes. Okay. We break.